When Vanessa and her brother and sister joined our family, they were 6, almost 7, 4, and 3. We didn't have a lot of contact with birth family. They were scheduled visits. They were in reunification. But for a variety of reasons, the birth parents typically did not show up at the visits. They had maybe 1 or 2 visits where we didn't get to actually interact with them, but we saw them from kind of across the room.
When we moved in with, the Schugg family, with my mom and dad, there was a little bit of sense of comfort knowing that I had, my siblings with me. But I also felt really confused and lost at the same time, and I kind of felt blame, kind of guilty at the same time.
Vanessa carried a tremendous amount of guilt for caring for her younger siblings and having that level of responsibility, and feeling like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but feeling like maybe it was your fault that you ended up in foster care, because at that age, of course, you think that the world revolves around you. And so as a 6-year-old, Vanessa would have horrible, just debilitating migraines. So every 20 to 30 days, she'd get a migraine that lasted for 2 or 3 days, where she was just rocking, had to be in a dark room, was throwing up, had to miss school. And it was a tremendous amount for this little tiny, she was an itty bitty thing. I mean, she weighed 32 pounds or something at 6 years old. So she was a little tiny thing, and having just these tremendous migraines that went on for months and months. And then finally in therapy, they were able to pull in a member of the birth family to literally say, it wasn't your fault. It was the adults who were making the wrong choices. Poof. And she didn't have any migraines after that. They were gone. And when Vanessa and her siblings first came to us, it was really our first experience with foster care. So we didn't know as much about birth families and the value of birth families to kids. And her family had a lot of gang involvement. There was a lot of domestic violence, a lot of criminality. And so it's interesting, it seemed to kind of play out intergenerationally. Like, my husband and I were concerned. My mom was worried. My grandparents were terrified. Like, there was this piece where I think we've had this kind of evolution where we have a much better understanding now of how people grow and change and how they care about the kids. So we were cautious, but we felt like it would be important to maintain contact.
I had a lot of questions, but I think I just didn't know really how to word it and how to have it come out. And I was curious when I was a kid, why were we taken? Was it my fault? I had those questions as a kid, but as I got older, I got more curious about who they are. Do I have any siblings? How many cousins do I have? Where are my birth parents, my birth mom and dad? So I did, but I think the questions didn't really start to develop till I was probably, I want to say, in middle school. So I was starting to really ask these questions, what's the history like with them? But I was in high school, and I went to a friend's house, and I went and checked my MySpace, and I went and checked my messages, and there was a message from my birth mother's sister, who had contacted me with this long paragraph, just stating, I know your birth dad, I'm your birth mom's sister, I know your brother and sister. She named, their names and our ages and our birthdays. And, I was surprised. I was just like, I didn't really know what to say. I didn't respond back yet. Went home and actually talked to my mom about it and told her.
You did. You sent me a text. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
You sent me a text. And the text said, "Mommy, I have great news." Right? So this aunt has found me. And at the moment I was like, oh boy. Because we hadn't had any contact for 10 years at that point. We had sent pictures and letters to the county, to the social worker there, but the birth family had not left their most current address. So nothing really happened there. And so after 10 years, she sent this, and I thought, well, we must have done something right, because she's telling me, which is really important, and she thinks that I'm going to be excited about it. I tried. It took a minute. And then, so the way that we had talked about the birth family had always been, we were very factual about what had happened and about the abuse and neglect and things like that, but also very compassionate and respectful about them as people. And so I felt in that moment like we must have done something right for her to come to me right away and say we have this contact, because that's what we want. We don't want them to go underground with it or feel like it's something that they have to hide. And so I called her, and I wasn't really sure what we were going to say, but I called and said, Vanessa gave me your number, and she was so scared that I was going to be mad at her. She was really, really scared that I was going to be angry. And I said, no, I want to thank you. And she said, thank me? And I said, yeah, because of all the things that the kids remember, and a lot of them were really scary and really painful, the one thing that they remember that was positive was that you went and got them cereal. And they were in the habit of having to search for food, and Vanessa going out and, getting things out of garbage cans and things like that. And they remember that you went and got them cereal and brought them cereal, and I always wanted to thank you for that. Then we started talking, and she said that some of the family would like to come down and meet them. And at that point, we had experience with birth family and navigating those relationships from the other sibling group that we had adopted. So we were pretty open to it, and we ended up picking a time that would be at our park in our town. We were going to be down there for her brother's birthday, and said, okay, well, we're going to be at this park. I wasn't really ready to have them come to the house yet because I hadn't met them in person, but I said, you're welcome to come and visit us there. We go over to greet them. They all come down. No birth parents. Birth parents were not ready to meet the kids at this point. So this is all extended family. Okay, cousins, aunt, uncle, grandparents, Nana. And they come down, and so I go introduce myself, and we've always treated birth family with dignity and humanity and respect. So, hug them, hi, I'm Debbie, et cetera, et cetera. And we're kind of gathered around, and the grandpa in the wheelchair grabs onto the side of the wheelchair and starts to push himself up, and the whole family goes, and they all take a step back and gasp. And so we're all looking at each other. Well, Grandpa has no hip bones. He's had the balls of the ball and socket joint have been removed. So he has no hip joints, which is why they were so aghast. And he's pulling himself up. And he said, I promised myself, you remember this? That if we ever found them, I would stand to hug them. And I'm like, Grandpa! So Grandpa's crying, Grandma's crying, and Nana's crying, and I'm crying. And the aunties and uncles are crying. The cousins are all just running around. And that was my first real introduction to them in person.
I was really nervous. I remember shaking. Chills were just going crazy. My mind was going 100 miles per hour. But I think after all the hugs and saying hi, I had my cousins, and it was fun. They were fun. They were, we were all playing around. We were taking selfies, getting on each other's backs, cracking jokes, talking about, do you remember this and this and this? And I'm just like, no. Because my cousins were like, I was brushing your hair and I would braid it. And, I didn't remember that back. But after the meeting, I was happy. I was thrilled. I had contact with my birth family again. I was able to kind of understand a little bit more than, asking my mom questions, who had very solid, very clear answers. But be able to ask them questions and talk to them, It was nice.
The people that we had pegged as clearly the most functional couple in this group, there was an aunt and uncle, and they said, hey, you're here in California, we live in Arizona. If you ever want to come to Arizona, come and visit. And I'm like, yeah, no thanks. But we weren't eager to go stay with them. But I said, we actually are going to be in Arizona in a couple of weeks for a basketball camp that my husband's doing. So maybe we can, visit. So sure enough, we went, and 10 of us went and spent a week in the home of the aunt and uncle that we met at the park. So while we're visiting in Arizona, the birth family has cousins coming over and visiting, and everybody's so excited. And I remember you when you were a baby. I changed your diapers, blah, blah. And really marveling about the similarities, just in terms of genetics, the mannerisms that were the same, the laughs that were the same, those kind of things. And the aunt and uncle had said, you know, any questions that you all have, we'll be happy to answer. We'll answer them truthfully, etc. So we were enjoying the stay. I was spending a lot of time with them. And on about the third day, this one says, I have a question. And so her aunt's like, what is it, Mia? Right? And she said, you know, for the last 3 days, do you remember this? For the last 3 days, all of you have been loving us up and saying how much you miss us and how much you love us and how much you want to connect. Where the hell were you when we went into foster care? And I was like, ooh, what's going to happen with this, you know? And the room went silent for a minute. I thought, that's a really good question, because I, as her adoptive mom, I don't know. I don't have the answer for her. Like, I need this aunt. So the aunt and uncle had 3 kids, one of whom has severe cerebral palsy, very spastic, in a wheelchair, unable to speak, things like that. Very involved in the family, though. And her aunt said, you know, your uncle had a history of substance abuse, like your parents, and we were afraid that if we stepped up for you, that they would take our kids away. And we thought that our daughter would die in foster care because no one would know how to meet her needs and take care of her. I was like, oh. And she's like, oh, well, that makes sense. And then on they went with their day. It was so powerful, because if she had come to me with that question, I didn't have an answer for it. And it was only because we took the risk of forging this relationship that she was able to have that satisfied in a really tangible, relevant way and move on.